I was just a little girl when it began. Every time my father went to work, the house turned into a prison. My three brothers, who were supposed to protect me, stole my childhood one whisper, one shadow, one locked door at a time. For decades, I stayed silent. Until one day, I found the tape my mother left behind, and the truth finally screamed louder than their lies. Hi, my name is Clarice Holloway. I'm 68 years old, and if you're a woman watching this who knows what it's like to hold your breath every time footsteps echo down the hall, this story is for you. Please, before I begin, like this video if you've ever kept a secret for too long and comment where you're watching from. These stories? They're not just mine, they're ours. I grew up in a brown farmhouse tucked between acres of corn and silence. My father was a good man, or at least he tried to be. Worked long hours at the mill to feed 4 mouths. My mother died giving birth to me, so I never really knew softness or lullabies or the warmth of being held just because. My brothers David, the oldest, then Julian and Levi, the youngest of the 3. To the outside world, we looked like a hard-working family. Inside that house, though, the walls were witnesses and I was the prisoner. I remember the first time I realized something was wrong. I was just 10. My father had left early for a double shift, the kind that kept him away until dusk. I was still in my nightdress, hair tangled from sleep. David knocked on my door. Not loudly, just a soft, deliberate tap. I smiled then. He brought me a piece of bread with sugar on top. For being our baby sister, he said. I bit into it. Sweet. But the taste turned bitter the moment he stepped into the room and locked the door behind him. It wasn't about what he did first. It was about how he looked at me. Like I was something that didn't belong to myself anymore. Julian and Levi followed in time. It wasn't always at once. Sometimes days would pass. Other times, it was all of them. Together. I learned that footsteps at noon were not safe. I learned to sleep sitting up, to keep my eyes open even when they burned. I'd stare at the wooden ceiling and whisper to the cracks, please, just let it be over. But it never was. One day, I tried to tell my teacher. I wrote it in my spelling notebook, in messy block letters, and left it on her desk. The next day, she didn't look me in the eye. The page was gone. Nothing happened. After that, I stopped writing and started hiding. But even that wasn't safe. They found every hiding place I had, closet, barn, under the porch. And each time, they smiled after. If you're still watching this, and you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, please comment, I hear you. Because that silence almost killed me. And I don't want anyone to feel alone in it. One afternoon, when I was about 14, something different happened. I was sweeping the kitchen when Levi came in. But this time, he didn't touch me. He looked scared. Dad saw your dress, he whispered. The one from last week. The rip. My heart stopped. I had hidden that dress under the woodpile. My father had never once asked me a personal question. But that day, he came home early. And for the first time in years, something shifted. That's where I'll pause for today. That evening is carved into my memory like it happened yesterday. I was standing by the stove, stirring watery beans for dinner. My brothers sat at the table, David sharpening a pocket knife, Julian pretending to read a newspaper, Levi picking at his nails. Just a normal night, until we heard the door slam. My father walked in early. His boots still dusty, his shirt half-buttoned, eyes darker than usual. He didn't speak at first. He just looked around the room like something was off balance. And then, he looked at me. His gaze stopped at my arm. The sleeve of my dress was frayed, torn right at the shoulder seam. I had tried to mend it, but you can't sew shame back together. He stepped closer, so close I smelled the sweat and engine grease on his clothes. What happened to your dress? He asked, low and quiet. No one said a word. David's hand tightened around the knife. Julian folded the paper so sharply the snap echoed. Levi stood like he might run. I opened my mouth. My throat burned. I couldn't say it. Not directly. Not with them in the room. So I said something else. I fell. Out by the fence, I whispered. My father didn't believe me. I saw it in his eyes. He turned and looked at each of them, David, Julian, Levi. And for a second, I thought, maybe he knew. But then, he walked past me. He sat down. And he said, "Let's eat." Like nothing happened. If you're a viewer watching this right now, have you ever been betrayed by someone you thought would protect you? Someone you trusted to be your shield, but they chose to look away? Please comment your thoughts. I want to know I'm not the only one. That night, I cried into my pillow, not from fear, not even from pain, but from hopelessness. The kind of hopelessness that makes you stop praying. Because what's the point of prayer if God keeps sending the same monsters to your door? But something did change. A week later, I caught my father standing behind the barn, smoking a cigarette with his back turned. That wasn't strange. But he was crying. I hadn't seen him cry since Mom died. I crept back inside before he could see me. From that day forward, the air in the house thickened. Not quieter, tenser. Like the walls were listening now. Watching. One afternoon, while my brothers were in town, he called me to the living room. Just us two. He said, "I want to talk about the dress." I froze. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He just asked, "Did they touch you?" I said nothing. I couldn't. But I nodded. Once. And something in him broke. He didn't cry this time. His face just fell blank. He walked out the door without a word. Took his truck. Didn't return that night. Or the next. The third day, David started to worry. "Where's Pop?" he asked. Julian muttered, "Maybe he's out drinking." But Levi didn't say a word. Then came the knock on the door. Not police. Not neighbors. A woman. Gray hair. Long coat. Clipboard in hand. "Clarice Holloway?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm from the county. Your father filed a report." That's when the real story began. When the woman from the county stepped into our house, something shifted. Her name was Mrs. Bertram. She was tall, with silver hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun and a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Your father told us there may be concerns about your well-being," she said, flipping open a folder. "Is it true that your brothers are often alone in the house with you?" I hesitated. Behind her, Levi stood in the doorway, watching me, silent, breathing too hard. I nodded slowly. David's footsteps came heavy down the stairs. "What's going on here?" he barked, pretending confusion. Julian followed, smirking like it was all some misunderstanding. Mrs. Bertram turned to them and smiled politely, but something in her voice was firm. "This is an informal welfare check. Your father has made some serious claims." David snorted. "He's gone soft in the head." That night, after she left, the house turned colder. David cornered me in the hallway. "What lies did you tell him?" he whispered. I didn't respond. But he leaned in too close. His breath warm. His hand brushed my arm not with kindness, but with control. "You think you're clever?" he said. "You think someone's gonna save you?" He tugged at the sleeve of my blouse, slowly, deliberately, just enough to make me freeze. Not enough to rip it this time, just enough to show he still could. Julian wasn't much better. He never touched me the way David did. No. He played mind games. He'd leave notes under my pillow. Things like, "What happens if they don't believe you?" Or "Girls who lie get locked away." And Levi, he was always quiet, but he watched. Too much. His gaze always dropped below my eyes. Like I wasn't human. Like I was something they owned. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel like an object, just someone's property, you're not alone. Please like this video. And comment if you've ever felt trapped in your own home. Because that's what it was. A prison wrapped in wallpaper. Then one afternoon, something happened that felt different. I was folding laundry on the back porch. It was peaceful for once. I could hear birds. I could hear myself breathe. Then Julian walked out. He didn't say anything, just stood behind me. I felt the warmth of his presence, too close. His hand brushed the hem of my skirt. He didn't grip it, didn't yank. He just let his fingers sit there, light as a whisper, but heavy as a threat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I stayed still, frozen. He leaned in and said, "Remember what happened to Emily Lorne?" Nobody believed her either. Emily, my classmate, gone, moved away without warning. Some said her uncle had done something, but no one ever confirmed. Julian laughed and went back inside. That night, I made a decision. If help wasn't coming fast enough, I would find a way to make them see, even if it meant exposing every wound they left behind. Even if it meant risking everything, because silence wasn't protecting me anymore. The night it happened was colder than usual. The kind of cold that slipped beneath your skin and stayed there. I was 15 then, still sleeping in the small room near the stairs, the one with the thin mattress and broken window latch. I had laid out my Sunday dress on the bed that morning, intending to patch a loose button. But I never got the chance. That night, I woke up to a shadow. David. Again. But this time, it wasn't just him. Julian stood behind him. And Levi lingered in the hallway, half hidden, half watching, like a spectator to his favorite sport. I whispered, "Please, not tonight." But David just smiled, calm and cruel. He sat on the edge of my bed and ran his fingers across the sheet like it was silk. "Why do you always act like you don't like it?" he whispered. I flinched. And that's when it started again. Not with violence. Not first. With gestures. He pulled the dress I had folded neatly on the bed, held it up in front of me. "This," he said, "you think this makes you innocent?" Then he dropped it to the floor and stepped on it with his boot. I could feel Julian's breath behind me. He didn't say anything, just pulled a thread loose from my pillow and watched it dangle like a spider's web. The next moments blurred. Not in memory, no, I remember every detail. But in feeling, because sometimes the pain isn't in the act. It's in the betrayal, the loss of safety, the way you leave your own body to survive. That night, when they finally left the room, I sat still until the sun rose. And then I saw it. A faint mark of blood on the edge of the sheet. My hands trembled, not because of pain, but because I knew what I had to do. I folded the sheet carefully, hid it in my drawer, and waited. The next time Mrs. Bertram came back, this time without warning, I asked to speak to her privately. We sat on the back porch. I handed her the sheet without looking up. She took it gently, her hands gloved, her eyes cautious. "What is this?" she asked softly. "Proof," I whispered. I expected her to hug me, to say something comforting. Instead, she stood. "I need to call someone," she said. And she did. The next 24 hours were a blur of cars, questions, whispers, and stares. And that's when I found out what my father had really done. He didn't just file a report. He had told the county to send someone to take me somewhere safe. He had planned it. From the moment he saw the tear in my dress. He never came back because he thought they'd remove me from that house. He thought that was the best way to save me. But it wasn't. Because the system didn't work the way it should have. Instead of taking me, they questioned me, over and over again. And my brothers? They lied. Flawlessly. David said, "She's troubled." Julian said, "She makes things up." Levi just looked down and nodded in agreement. If you're still watching this, and if you've ever told the truth only to be painted as a liar, please comment, "I believe you." Because I know what it's like to scream and have no one listen. They didn't remove me from the house. Not yet. But something had changed. They were watching now. And that made my brothers angry. Angrier than I'd ever seen them. And angry men are dangerous. After that second visit from Mrs. Bertram, everything in the house changed, but not in the way I hoped. My brothers didn't touch me for a few days. Not physically. But that silence? It was louder than the abuse. David stopped speaking altogether. He just stared. Cold, fixed eyes whenever I walked by. The kind of stare that made you feel like you were being skinned alive without a blade. Julian got meaner with his words. "You like playing the victim, don't you?" he sneered one night while I was folding towels. Poor little Clarice with her sad little stories. Levi. Levi became a ghost. He barely looked at me, but I could feel him watching from corners, hallways, even from behind cracked doors. The sheet I gave Mrs. Bertram must have rattled them. But it didn't stop them. It made them vengeful. One night, just 3 days after her visit, I found a note under my pillow. It was written in red ink. "Next time, we won't be gentle." I froze. My hand started shaking so bad I had to sit down. I pressed the paper against my chest and tried to breathe. And then I made a decision. I went out to the tool shed while they were still out back drinking. I looked through the drawers. My fingers brushed over the handles of hammers, pliers, screwdrivers. And then I saw it. An old clothes iron. Heavy. Cold. Dusty. Not plugged in, of course, it hadn't been used in years. But it was solid. Metal. A weapon, if it had to be. That night, I slid it under my pillow. If they came into my room again, they'd meet more than silence. I didn't sleep. I just waited. The mattress squeaked under every twitch of my muscles. At 2:13 a.m., the doorknob turned. Not a full turn. Just a click. Like someone was testing if I was awake. I gripped the iron. Tighter than I ever held anything in my life. But the door never opened. The click faded. And, for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. They knew I was ready. The next morning, David's eye was twitching over breakfast. Julian's knuckles were red. But no one said a word. And yet, I couldn't live like that anymore. Not just waiting for the next night, the next tap at the door, the next shadow in the hallway. So I took it further. I started documenting everything, every look, every bruise. Every time I caught them staring at me with hunger in their eyes, I wrote it down. I hid the notebook under the loose floorboard near the window, behind the curtain where they never cleaned. If they were going to kill me for speaking, I was going to make sure someone knew why. That's when the next twist came. One I never saw coming. One that didn't involve them. It was about my mother. My dead mother. And the secret she had left behind. I never knew my mother. They said she died giving birth to me. Complications, they called it. Blood loss. Quiet funeral. No photos on the walls. No stories at the dinner table. Just a name, Marianne Holloway, and a silence that followed me like a second shadow. But one rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled low across the sky, I found something that changed everything. I was cleaning the attic. David had told me to get rid of old crap up there. I think he just liked giving me orders. But I didn't argue. The attic was one of the few places where no one followed. While moving a dusty box of mason jars, I saw a corner of a floorboard that looked wrong. Lifted. Like it had been pulled up and pushed back too many times. I got on my knees and wedged it loose with the end of a broken hanger. And there it was. A small tin box. Inside, a faded letter. A photograph. A tiny silver locket. I opened the letter first. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places, but I could read enough. If you're reading this, I hope you're old enough to understand. Your mother didn't fall sick. She didn't die by accident. Your father lied. And so did the boys. They saw what they did. And they let it happen to me. Just like they might do to you. Be stronger than I was. Fight. M.H. I dropped the letter like it burned. My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the photo next. A young woman. Long black hair. Sad eyes. Holding a baby. Me. My mother hadn't died in childbirth. She had been killed by the same pattern that was now circling me. If you're watching this, please, I beg you, comment, "I'm here for you" if you're still listening. Because this part of the story, it's where the ghosts start screaming. I clutched the locket. It was old, tarnished, but still intact. Inside was a single strand of hair and a folded paper that read only, "They cannot win. Not again." I hid the tin box in the pocket of my apron and ran downstairs. But I wasn't careful enough. Levi saw me. His eyes dropped to the bulge in my pocket. He didn't say anything, but that night, my door creaked open again. This time, I didn't wait. I stood with the iron in my hand. And for the first time, I spoke. "If you come near me again, I swear to God I'll use it." He stood there, frozen in the doorway. Then he laughed. "You think that old tin box is going to save you?" So he had seen it. And he knew. But instead of lunging at me, he whispered, "They did the same to her, you know. All three of us." And she begged. "Just like you." And then he left. That's when I realized something even worse than what they did. They weren't ashamed. They were proud. It was never about power. It was about legacy. And I was going to end it. The morning after Levi's words, I couldn't eat. Couldn't sit still. I stared at the tin box and the letter again, rereading every word like it might give me instructions. But it didn't tell me how to survive, it only told me I had to. I decided to take a risk. Mrs. Bertram had given me her card during the last visit. Slipped it into my hand quickly, like she wasn't supposed to. I had hidden it behind the mirror in the hallway, taped to the back so no one would see. That day, I waited until all three of them left to chop wood behind the barn. Then I ran to the neighbor's house, Mrs. Winslow, a widow who lived alone and barely spoke to anyone since her husband died in '62. She opened the door with a scowl, but the moment she saw my face, her expression softened. I didn't say much. I just asked if I could use her phone. She nodded and pointed me to the wall. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. It rang twice. Then a voice, "County Welfare Office. This is Rebecca." "Mrs. Bertram, please," I said. My voice cracked. She came on fast. "Clarice." I didn't answer her name. I just whispered, "I found something. About my mother. And I think they're going to do something worse." There was a pause on the line. The kind where you know someone is holding their breath. "I need you to stay calm," she said, her tone tight. "Can you meet me at the chapel in town in 1 hour? Don't bring anything. Just come." I hung up, thanked Mrs. Winslow, and ran back home like nothing happened. But something had happened. That one phone call cracked open a secret I never could have expected. Because when I reached the chapel, sweaty, nervous, and nearly shaking out of my shoes, Mrs. Bertram wasn't alone. There was a man with her. Tall, thin, square jaw, blue tie. Detective Raymond Caro. He said my name. Softly, kindly. He held out a file and slid it across the wooden bench. And when I opened it, I saw something that made the blood leave my face. My mother's original death certificate. Under cause of death, one word had been scratched out. Next to it, a handwritten note dated 2 months later. Initial ruling overturned. Suspicious bruising found on torso and legs. My mother had tried to tell someone, too. She died before they could do anything about it. Detective Caro spoke gently. "We believe your father knew. And we believe he tried to protect you by filing the report. But the case went cold. No one followed up." He looked ashamed. Mrs. Bertram reached into her bag and pulled out another paper. A list of dates. Every visit. Every warning. Every complaint my father had made and been ignored. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. I sat there in silence. Then I asked only one question. "What do I do now?" Detective Caro leaned forward. "You help us build a case. You don't go back there. Not alone." I shook my head. "I have to go back tonight." They both protested, but I stood firm. "I have something they need to see. Something only I can show them." Because I had found one more thing in the attic that I hadn't told them about yet. And if I played it right, I could end everything. Not with violence, but with truth. I didn't tell them everything at the chapel. Detective Caro, Mrs. Bertram. They didn't know I had already found something else. Something far more dangerous than a letter or a blood-stained sheet. A VHS tape. It was buried in the attic behind the insulation. I'd found it by accident while digging through boxes days earlier. Tucked between old receipts and a broken birdcage was a small cardboard sleeve with the word Summer 91 scribbled on the label. It wasn't labeled in my father's handwriting. No, it was my mother's. Something in my gut told me not to mention it yet. I needed to see it first. So that night, I returned home as if nothing had happened. I tucked the tape under my sweater and made my way to the basement, the one place my brothers never went. Too damp, too dark. They said it smelled like mildew and ghosts. I didn't mind the ghosts. I already lived with monsters. The basement had an old TV, bulky, dusty, and scratched from years of sitting untouched. I plugged in the VCR and slid the tape in with trembling fingers. It flickered. Static. Then, a shaky home video began to play. My mother was on screen, holding baby me. She looked scared, her eyes darting toward the door. Her voice trembled. If you're seeing this, it means you've found what I couldn't say out loud. She turned the camera to the mirror behind her. Her face bruised. Her shoulder exposed, bruises there too. They're not children anymore. They're shadows of their father. And I don't know how to stop them. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I begged him. I begged my husband to take them to a doctor, to church, to anywhere. But he said, boys will be boys. She paused, then whispered, if they do to her what they've done to me, God forgive me. The screen cut to black. I sat frozen. She knew. She knew it would continue. She knew they were already twisted. And she tried, to stop the cycle. But no one listened. Just like no one listened to me. If you're still here, please comment. I see her in the chat. My mother deserved to be seen. She deserved to be heard. And I will not let her memory rot in silence. I took the tape and slipped it into my satchel. This was my weapon now. Not iron. Not rage. Truth. But as I climbed the basement steps, I heard voices. Julian and David were in the kitchen. And one line froze my blood. We can't wait anymore, David growled. She's getting bold. Julian hissed, then we handle it. Tonight. They were planning something. And I didn't have time to wait for police paperwork or court hearings. I had to act. Before they did. The hours before it happened felt like walking across a tightrope made of glass. Every sound, every creak in the floorboards was louder than thunder. Every glance from Julian, every tense silence from David, felt like a countdown. Levi didn't speak at all that day. He just lingered near the windows, chewing the skin off his thumb, eyes darting like a trapped animal. He knew something was coming. I think a part of him was afraid too. But not for me, for himself. I kept my face calm. I made dinner like I always did, chicken stew and dry bread. I cleared the plates without a word. I even said good night when I went up to my room. It was all part of the act, because I needed them to think I was still the same scared little girl. Not the girl who had a tape in her satchel. Not the girl who had already made a second call to Detective Caro and arranged everything. Not the girl who, just hours ago, had slipped into David's room and stolen the spare key to the gun cabinet. I tucked the iron back under my pillow anyway. Old habits, old armor. And then I lay down and waited. It didn't take long. At exactly 12:42 a.m., the hallway floor creaked. I heard Julian whisper, "You sure she's asleep?" David said nothing. I kept my breath slow, steady, just like I had done so many nights before. But this time, I wasn't a victim. I was bait. The doorknob turned. My heart slammed against my chest, but I didn't move. Footsteps. Then a voice, low, ugly. "David, you thought you could ruin us?" I felt his presence above me, closer than breath. He grabbed the sheet, started to pull. That's when I moved. Fast. I sat up, grabbed the iron with both hands, and smashed it down, not on him, but on the floor. Boom. It was loud enough to shake the walls. He stumbled back. What the? Then came the lights. Through the window, I saw them. Flashlights. Boots. Voices. Police. They were already there. They'd been waiting at the end of the drive, Detective Caro idea. I told him they'd come that night. I just needed to prove it. I stood, holding the iron in one hand, the VHS tape in the other. "You're not touching me ever again," I said. Julian tried to run. Levi froze. David lunged, but by then the door burst open. "Drop it," shouted the officer. In seconds, they were tackled. Handcuffed. I stood in the middle of that room, barefoot, in a nightgown, trembling but not afraid. Because it was over. Or so I thought. If you're still watching, don't scroll away. Please. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to know. You can win. Even when no one believes you at first. Even when your whole life has been a trap. But remember, justice doesn't always come clean. Sometimes it drags old blood with it. And what came next? That was the hardest part. The night of the arrest, I thought it was over. I truly believed that once the truth was out, the world would finally step in, wrap me in safety, and say, "We believe you." But I was wrong. What they don't tell you is that justice isn't a clean cut, it's a process. And for someone like me, a girl turned woman with years of silence and no one on her side but a dead mother and a dusty VHS tape, it wasn't easy. The police took them away that night. Julian screamed the entire time. David stared at me with eyes that didn't blink. And Levi? Levi just cried. As they drove off, I stood on the porch in bare feet, the tape still warm in my hand from where I'd gripped it so hard. I'd left indentations. Detective Caro walked up beside me. "You did good," he said. "You're safe now." But deep inside, I didn't feel safe. Because the worst part wasn't the abuse. It was what came after. 3 days later, I was sitting in a courthouse waiting room, surrounded by lawyers and strangers in press suits who used words like alleged and plausibility and psychological inconsistencies. Words that erase truth like chalk on pavement. A woman in pearls, someone from Child Services, handed me a folder. "They're claiming you fabricated the story," she said, as though reading off a lunch menu. "That the VHS tape was doctored. That you've had mental disturbances since childhood." I blinked. Mental disturbances? They've submitted letters from old neighbors. A school counselor report that says you had an active imagination. One even claims you had invisible friends well into your teens. That part was true. But those friends? They weren't imaginary. They were the versions of myself I wished I could be. Brave. Loud. Safe. I clutched the locket from my mother that I kept in my coat pocket and whispered under my breath, "Don't let them bury me again." The trial wasn't swift. David got the best lawyer money could buy. Julian followed. Levi tried to separate himself from them, claiming he was only a bystander, that he never participated, just saw things and didn't know how to intervene. And me? I was put on the stand. At 68 years old. Having to recount what happened to me as a child. Using metaphors, euphemisms, and delicate language because the courtroom didn't want to hear what it really sounded like when a young girl's life was stolen night after night. I said things like, "They entered my room when they weren't invited. They made me feel like my body was theirs. They pulled at my clothes and smiled when I froze. I became a piece of furniture to them. Something to use and forget." Some of the jury members looked uncomfortable. Some looked disbelieving. And that's when the defense made their move. They brought in my old principal, Mr. Hadley. I hadn't seen him since I was 14. He said things like Clarice was always a troubled girl, and her family was strict, yes, but not abusive. She once claimed a substitute teacher was poisoning her lunch. It was ranch dressing. The room laughed. They laughed. And I wanted to scream. Not because of the betrayal, but because I realized that so many women like me had never gotten their moment to be heard. We were the joke in someone else's story. That night, I went home to the shelter Mrs. Bertram had arranged for me. I curled up in bed and cried into a pillow like I was 14 again. And then, something miraculous happened. An envelope was slid under my door. Inside was a photograph. One I'd never seen before. It was my mother, Marianne, standing in front of the very same courthouse. And behind her? A man. Not my father. A younger man. He looked almost like David, but not quite. On the back of the photo, written in the same shaky script from the attic, "If they ever come after her, show them who they really are." A cousin? An uncle? A secret child? There was more to this story. So much more. I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was unraveling a generational curse. And someone, maybe my mother, maybe fate, was helping me from the grave. I stared at that photo until my eyes blurred. Not from age, not from sleep, but from disbelief. There was my mother, so young, so beautiful, wearing a dress I recognized only from memory. It was the same one I found in the attic, tucked in a cedar chest, still smelling faintly of lilac and salt. And beside her? A man who looked eerily familiar. Tall, strong jaw, same eyes as David. But it wasn't my father. My heart started racing. I flipped the photo over again. The handwriting, definitely hers. My mother's. I traced the curve of each letter like I could pull her back to life if I just read it enough times. If they ever come after her, show them who they really are. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office. I told them I needed access to birth records, family archives, anything under the name Marion Holloway or her maiden name, Marion Keller. The woman behind the desk didn't even blink. She just nodded and told me to sit. I waited over an hour, and what they brought back nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. A second birth certificate. Not mine. David's. But under father, the name listed wasn't my father's at all. It was Walter Avery, a man who died in a construction accident 6 months before David was born. And the kicker? Walter Avery had been my father's cousin. Everything began unraveling right there. My mother had a relationship, perhaps brief, perhaps real, with Walter. And my father? He must have known. He married her anyway, claimed David as his own, raised him, and I believe hated both of them for it. Because from the time David could talk, he was told he was the man of the house. He was given power. Too much power for a boy that young. Too many responsibilities. And too many twisted ideas of what it meant to be a man. I believe my father's silent punishment for my mother's betrayal was letting David grow up unchecked. Letting him believe he was more than just a boy. Letting him believe he was entitled. If you're still here watching this, tell me in the comments, have you ever uncovered a family secret so heavy it crushed everything you thought you knew? Because that was me. At 68, learning that the man I feared, the man who started it all, wasn't even my real brother. Which begged the question, what else had been buried? I returned to the shelter and dug through every paper I had brought from the house. In an old folder, wedged behind tax documents, I found another note. A letter addressed to me. From my mother. Handwritten. Torn at the edges. Clarice, if you ever find out the truth about David, know this. You are not like them. You never were. You were my second chance. I tried to protect you. I failed. But you can still escape. You can still end it. You are stronger than me. I believe in you. Love, Mom. I broke down. There, on that cold shelter bed, I clutched that letter and cried like a child. Because for the first time, I felt her. Not just as a figure from the past. Not just as a photograph or a locket. But as a mother. A mother who had seen what was coming. And tried to leave me a map out of it. The courtroom smelled like old paper and colder air. I sat on the edge of the wooden witness stand, legs trembling under the long skirt I wore, one of the few I had left after the shelter took my torn clothes for evidence. The defense attorney adjusted his tie as he stood, flipping through his notes like he was trying to find a crack in my soul. The jury looked half tired, half curious. And in the corner, David, Julian, and Levi sat in a row, dressed in clean suits, looking like choir boys at a funeral. But they weren't grieving. They were calculating. I glanced to the side. Detective Caro gave me the faintest nod. Mrs. Bertram was there too, hands clasped in front of her chest like she was praying. Maybe she was. And then the attorney spoke. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "isn't it true you were institutionalized briefly at age 17 for hallucinations?" I smiled, because I was ready for this. "Yes," I said clearly, "after years of being assaulted, ignored, and gaslit by every man in my house and half the adults in my life, I began talking to the version of myself that hadn't been broken yet. I think that's what anyone would call survival." A few jurors blinked. One woman lowered her pen. The attorney frowned. "But you admit to creating imaginary worlds." I created a safe space in my mind. One where I didn't wake up to doors creaking open or hands pulling my nightgown. One where I was allowed to say no and not be punished for it. Silence. He tried again. "Do you have any proof that these alleged assaults happened?" I didn't even flinch. "I brought you blood-stained sheets." "That could be anything." "I gave you the tape." "It could be doctored." I leaned forward. "And what about my mother's letter? Her photo with the man who wasn't my father? The revised birth certificate for David? The signed note she left hidden in the attic warning that this would happen again? What about the bruises I still have on my ribs? The medical report from the shelter doctor?" He went quiet. "You're right," I added, voice rising now. "You can pretend everything else is a coincidence. A misunderstanding. But you can't explain away 3 grown men sneaking into a girl's bedroom at midnight and the police catching them in the act." The judge leaned forward. "Order." But I kept going, because that fire in me, it had waited decades. "I am not a liar. I am not broken. I am a survivor of something I never asked for. And I am standing here not just for myself, but for every girl who was told to stay quiet. Every girl whose truth was called a story. Every woman who was punished for being believed too late." One of the jurors, an older black woman with silver glasses, nodded, slow and solemn. Another scribbled something quickly in his notebook. And in the corner, Levi was crying again. But this time, I didn't feel sorry for him. Because behind every tear was a choice he made. Again and again. Silence. Cowardice. Complicity. And now? It was out. All of it. I stepped down from the stand. My legs were shaking, but not from fear. From release. Because I had finally told the truth where it mattered, and this time, they couldn't pretend not to hear. Courtrooms don't echo like they do in the movies. They don't have dramatic gasps or people rising to shout objection. The tension in real life sits lower, like fog around your feet, rising slowly until your breath catches and your knees forget how to stand. The day the verdict came down, I wore my mother's locket around my neck. Inside was a copy of the note she wrote me. Folded and faded, but still legible. Her words, her voice, wrapped around me like armor. The courtroom was packed. Local news crews had shown up. Apparently, a case like mine, one that had stretched across decades, crossed bloodlines, and clawed through the rot of family, was media-worthy. They didn't know I hadn't slept in 4 nights. I sat in the front row with Detective Caro and Mrs. Bertram beside me. I kept my hands folded, lips pressed together, eyes fixed on the jury box. My brothers sat behind their lawyers, smug and confident, or maybe just resigned. I couldn't tell. The bailiff entered with the paper. "All rise." The jury forewoman stood. "In the case of the state versus David Holloway, Julian Holloway, and Levi Holloway, we, the jury, find the defendants." I closed my eyes. David Holloway, guilty on all counts of assault and unlawful imprisonment. Julian Holloway, guilty on 2 counts of accessory to abuse and psychological coercion. Levi Holloway, not guilty on the primary charges, but guilty on willful negligence and failure to protect a minor. I couldn't breathe. It was a partial victory. Not perfect, but real. David stood, shouting, "You liars. You poisoned them," before the guards forced him down. Julian stared forward, eyes wide but blank. Hollow, like the truth had finally gutted him. And Levi? He didn't cry this time. He just looked at me and whispered, I'm sorry. But it was too late. Too late for apologies. Too late for saving himself. The judge delivered the sentences 2 weeks later. David got 20 years. No chance of parole. Julian got 12. Levi, 3 years probation, community service, and mandatory therapy. Was it enough? No. Nothing would ever be enough. But it was something. And for someone like me, someone who had been a ghost in her own life for more than 6 decades, something felt like everything. If you're still watching, still listening, still breathing through this with me, comment below. Justice doesn't come fast, but it comes. Because for some of us, truth is all we've got. And the only way it lives is if we speak it. After the trial, I walked out of that courthouse not as a victim, not even as a survivor. I walked out as a woman who had been heard. But the story wasn't over yet, because there was still one place I needed to go. One last promise I had to keep. It was almost poetic how quiet the house was. No voices. No boots on the stairs. No shadows peeking from corners. Just me, 68 years old. A suitcase in one hand. My mother's locket around my neck. And in my coat pocket, the key to the front door. I hadn't been back since the trial ended. The county gave me the legal right to reclaim the property. It was technically still in my father's name, but with him long gone and his sons convicted, the law finally saw the truth for what it was. I was the last rightful heir to that rotting tomb of secrets. As I stepped inside, I expected to feel fear. But I didn't. I felt nothing. No rage. No sadness. Just silence. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. The walls were still stained from decades of cigarette smoke. The hallway where I used to freeze when I heard footsteps, now just narrow and dusty. But it wasn't the house I came back for. It was her. My mother. I climbed the attic stairs slowly, each step creaking like a whisper. The same attic where I found the tin box. The letter. The dress. The photograph. The ghosts. I opened the old cedar chest one last time. Inside, I found it exactly where I left it, a folded quilt she had sewn herself. Each patch made from pieces of our old clothes. My baby blanket. Her favorite blue blouse. A strip from Dad's work shirt burned at the edge. I wrapped it around my shoulders. And I cried, not because I was broken, but because I was healing. If you're still here, if you're watching this after all these chapters, all these truths, please take a second and comment. We remember the forgotten. Because women like my mother, they deserve to be remembered. Not just for their pain, but for their strength. She lived in silence so I could speak in fire. I sat in that attic for hours. No lights on. No sounds but the wind outside. Then I did something no one expected. I lit a candle. And I prayed. Not to forget. Not to forgive. But to release. When I came back downstairs, I took one final walk through the house. Each room a memory. Each memory a wound that had scabbed over, scarred, and finally stopped bleeding. I left through the back door. Locked it. And I didn't look back. Because what was behind me didn't own me anymore. What was ahead? That was still being written. It had been 5 months since the trial. I'd moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy, but it had a garden, a warm kettle, and a porch swing that didn't creak too loud. More than anything, it had peace. For the first time in my life, I woke up without fear clinging to my spine. I'd started a small online support circle, just me, telling my story piece by piece to other women who had lived their own versions of silence. Sometimes they messaged. Sometimes they just watched. Sometimes they didn't say anything at all. But they stayed. And then one afternoon, just as the sun started dipping behind the pines, there was a knock at my door. I thought it was Mrs. Bertram. She often stopped by with groceries or updates from the court about compensation funds. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was a girl. Maybe 17. Maybe younger. Long sleeves despite the heat. Hair messy. Shoes worn out. Eyes too tired for her age. She didn't say her name. Just looked at me and asked, "Are you the woman who told her story?" I nodded. "I am." She stepped forward. "My uncle lives 3 doors down. He says I lie about the things he does at night." My breath caught. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just stood there like a child made of concrete. And in that moment, I saw me, the 10-year-old version. The girl who once bit her lip bloody so she wouldn't scream. The girl who sat under windows praying to a god who seemed deaf. I stepped aside and said, "Would you like some tea?" She sat at my kitchen table like she'd been there 100 times. I didn't ask questions. I didn't press. I just listened. And when she finally did speak, she told me things that chilled my bones but didn't surprise me. Because the story? It wasn't rare. It wasn't unique. It was happening. Again. Still. Right down the road. I gave her Mrs. Bertram's number. Helped her file a report. Offered her a room in the guest house until things were safe. But more than that, I gave her the one thing no one gave me for over 60 years. Belief. And that night, I realized something. My story didn't end with justice. It began with it. Because survival isn't the final chapter. Legacy is. If you're watching this, if you're still here, I want you to do something bold today. Share this video. Tag someone who needs to hear it. Write, "You are not alone" in the comments. Because somewhere, right now, a girl is sitting in silence. And your voice might be the first one to break through. It came in a plain envelope. No gold trim. No fancy stamp. Just a letter neatly folded, marked with the state seal in the corner. At first, I thought it was some bill or follow-up paperwork from the court. But when I opened it, my hands began to shake, not from fear this time, but from something far rarer in my life. Validation. "Mrs. Clarice Holloway, we have followed your case closely and deeply commend your bravery. In light of recent legislation being introduced to strengthen protections for abuse survivors, especially those impacted in childhood, we would be honored to have you speak at the Capitol hearing next month. Your voice matters. Your story matters. With respect, Office of the State Senator, Committee on Public Safety." I read that letter 3 times before I dared believe it was real. Me? A woman whose voice once cracked at the mention of her own name? A woman they once called crazy, imaginative, unstable? I would be speaking in front of lawmakers? I sat down slowly, the letter trembling in my lap. And then I cried, not from grief, not even from joy, but from release. I wasn't just reclaiming my life. I was rewriting the system that had once ignored me. When the day arrived, I wore a soft blue blouse and my mother's locket. The car picked me up at dawn. Mrs. Bertram insisted on coming along. So did Detective Caro. And that girl, the one who came to my door weeks ago? Her name was Lacey. She came too. When I walked into that grand building, marble echoing under my shoes, I felt like I was walking on every broken floorboard that ever creaked beneath me at night. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The hearing room was filled with senators, staffers, cameras, and advocates. They gave me 5 minutes. I took 7. I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. I spoke. My name is Clarice Holloway. I was abused for most of my childhood by the very people meant to protect me. I lived in silence for decades, not because I lacked courage, but because the system lacked ears. My mother tried to tell someone. No one listened. I tried to tell someone. They labeled me troubled. It shouldn't take decades for survivors to be heard. It shouldn't require blood on sheets or VHS tapes hidden in walls to be believed. What we need is a culture that asks better questions. That listens when girls whisper instead of waiting until they scream. There was a moment after I finished where no one moved. Then they stood and clapped. Not for the pain, but for the power I took back from it. If you're still with me, if you've come this far, I want you to know, you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You don't need fancy words or a big stage. You just need your truth and the will to say it out loud. Because sometimes, one voice really can change everything. The first letter came on a Monday. I recognized the return address instantly. The facility's name was printed in small type on the upper left corner of the envelope, State Correctional Institution, Block C. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. David's handwriting. It hadn't changed, still stiff and hard-pressed like every letter was a threat. Clarice, you've made your point. You dragged our name through the mud, got your applause, and now you're a hero. But we both know the truth. You always wanted attention. You were never innocent. Just remember, you're alone now. And I have plenty of time to think about you. Every single day. No apology. No remorse. Just the same venom, now inked on paper instead of whispered in the dark. I didn't respond. I didn't burn it either. I framed it, hung it on my wall, right next to the photo of me speaking at the Capitol. Because that letter wasn't power. It was proof that he'd lost it. A week later, another letter arrived. This time from Julian. His tone was different. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know what we were. I don't know why we became what we did. I see your face every night in my sleep. Not the woman you are now, the little girl. I'm sorry. For everything. I was a coward. I followed David because I was too weak to stop him. I hope one day you find peace. Even if I don't deserve to know about it. Still not enough. But it cracked something. For the first time, I realized they were stuck. Prison wasn't just bars and guards. It was time. Silence. Walls without escape. I had lived in prison for most of my life. But now, I was free. Levi's letter came last. A simple postcard. No envelope. I don't expect you to read this. But I had to write it. I knew. I always knew. I didn't stop them. And I'll never forgive myself. It was signed with just one initial, L. I placed all 3 letters in a box. Not to forget, but to remember who I'd become. Because for every sentence they wrote, I had lived an entire life beyond them. A life where I could sit on my porch in the morning, sip tea with real sugar, listen to birds that weren't warning me of footsteps. A life where I told my story my way and people didn't look away. And if you're watching this, please remember, survivors don't owe their abusers closure. We don't owe them kindness. We don't owe them answers. We owe ourselves peace. And sometimes, peace means never replying. It happened on a Thursday. No thunder outside. No nightmares. No creaking hallway. Just a sky full of stars and a breeze soft enough to remind me that I was still here. I had just returned home from a small support group meeting, a real one this time. Not virtual. A circle of folding chairs, paper cups of lukewarm tea, and women with eyes like mine, worn, weathered, but no longer hollow. We didn't share names. We didn't need to. We shared stories. And every time I spoke, even if it was just a sentence, I felt the weight lessen. Not all at once, but slowly, like dust leaving an old book finally opened. That night, I brushed my hair 50 times like Mama used to do. I pulled back the covers, tucked in the quilt she'd made. And before turning out the light, I whispered, "You did it, Mama. I made it." And I slept. I don't mean I laid there tossing and turning until dawn. I mean I slept. 8 uninterrupted hours. No panic. No gasps for air. No jolting upright thinking I heard the door handle turning. Just dreams. Soft ones. A porch swing. A little girl laughing. A woman in a blue dress humming the same lullaby she never got to sing to me. When I woke up, the sun was already peeking through the curtains. I sat up slowly, unsure what felt so different. Then I looked at the clock. 7:12 a.m. I had slept through the entire night. Not since I was 9 years old had that ever happened. I cried in bed, but not out of sadness, out of relief. If you're still watching, if you're still here with me on this journey, comment, "She finally slept." Because sleep isn't just rest. Sleep is peace. And peace is proof that the past no longer holds you by the throat. That morning, I opened the windows. I let the wind touch the old wallpaper. I let the sunlight pour over the picture frames. And I realized, this wasn't a haunted house anymore. It was mine. Not because I inherited it, but because I reclaimed it. Every inch, every corner, every night I survived in silence had led to this morning. It started with an email. Subject line: "Your story deserves to be read." At first, I thought it was spam. Or another scam trying to prey on older women who didn't know better. I almost deleted it, but something about the message stopped me. It was from a woman named Elena Ford, a junior editor at a publishing house in New York. She had watched my video, the whole series. She said she found it late one night, one of those aimless scrolls people do at 2 a.m. when sleep won't come. She clicked. She stayed. She cried. "Clarice," she wrote, "I have no right to ask anything of you. I don't know what it's like to carry what you've carried, but I know what it's like to need a voice that sounds like your own. If you ever want to put your story into words, into paper, I'll help you. No pressure. No rush. Just when you're ready." I sat at my kitchen table for hours after reading that email, staring at the blinking cursor, wondering what it would mean to write everything down, not for court, not for safety, not for survival, but for truth. And for others. I made tea, lit a candle, opened a new document, and I wrote the first line. They always came into my room after dark, but they never really left. That one sentence turned into a page, then 10, then 50. I wrote about the hallway creaks, the dress that tore at the shoulder, the iron under my pillow. I wrote about the blood, the shame, the voices that doubted me, and the voice I finally found. I stopped crying. I started healing. Writing didn't hurt, it freed me. The publishing house called it "when the silence screamed." They offered a modest advance. Said they didn't care if it sold 10 copies or 10,000. They just wanted it to exist. And when they printed the first copy, they mailed it to me in a velvet-wrapped box. Inside was a handwritten note from Elena. "This isn't just your story. It's ours now. If you're still with me and you've ever wanted to write something, anything, please hear this. Do it. Your pain, your joy, your journey, your voice. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. Please comment, tell it anyway. Because someone out there needs to hear your version of survival too." The room was packed. Soft jazz played over the speakers, and rows of neatly dressed people sat under gold chandeliers that sparkled like stars I never thought I'd reach. The event was called the Phoenix Gala, a night meant to honor those who rose from ashes to build something new. They had my name on the program: Clarice Holloway, recipient, Lifetime Resilience Recognition. I stood near the back, wearing a second-hand navy dress, hair pulled up the way Mama used to wear hers when she was feeling brave. When they called my name, I froze for a moment. Not because I was afraid, but because I felt the weight of every version of me, the 10-year-old hiding under a blanket, the teenager whispering to cracked wallpaper, the middle-aged woman clutching a hot iron in the night, all rising with me. I walked to the stage. People clapped. Some stood. But all I could hear were the echoes of silence that used to fill my ears, now replaced by applause. I took the microphone and said, "I never thought I'd stand in a room like this. Most of my life, I didn't think I'd live long enough to tell the truth. But here I am, not because I'm special, not because I'm strong, but because I got tired of being quiet." I could see people wiping their eyes. And for a moment, it felt like I had given my mother that award too. The one she never got. The one she deserved before they buried her name. But you know what mattered more than the award? Not the lights. Not the plaque. Not the dinner. It was what happened after. A woman approached me in the hallway, maybe in her 50s, trembling as she held her purse like a shield. She said, "My granddaughter, she's going through something." I didn't believe her at first. But after your story, I asked her to tell me again. And this time, I listened. "You saved her, Clarice. You saved her." And that was the moment. Because awards gather dust. But truth? It lights fires in other people's dark. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to thank you, from every scarred page of my life. Please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And if you can, comment. I hear you. I believe you. I survived too. Because these stories, they're not just entertainment. They're survival manuals. For all the women still whispering into pillows. For all the girls staring out windows, praying someone will see them. This was mine. Now go tell yours.